All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. We're so happy to see you for session 4 already. Wow, we've been together for 4 weeks. I definitely feel like I miss you in between the meetings, that's for sure. It's been such a real pleasure with the energy you've brought and what we've learned and heard from you. So still me and Andrea, same people as last time, and we're here with the same goals, always to hopefully give you things you can use right away in your work, highlight things you're already doing, and bring some new energy to you, and also, of course, always learn from what we hear from the people that we do sessions with. So we could hopefully today, I think we have some great tools that you'll enjoy. I know one of them is a harm reduction plan for eviction, and people love that. And as usual, we have some time for you guys to chat. We love to see your faces if you're camera ready. So, and at least maybe in the beginning and the end, if you can say hello to your colleagues and us, make sure you change the way you want us to address you. We go by first names. We love the interaction, so don't wait. And I know I don't have to tell this crowd because you guys have been one of the most interactive groups ever, I would have to say. You're like getting the award. So many different people talking about so many different things. So keep it up. And today is like centering forget what happened on the way to work question is to type in the chat box for all to see what your cell phone screensaver, wallpaper, whatever you call it is, and how long you've had it. And this is not my screensaver, but I might make it my screensaver, the dog in high heels and pink high heels, but it's cute. I see a few of you laughing. So are we getting any responses? Oh, I'm seeing the chat coming up.
Picture my doggies, says Letitia.
Doggies. That's my screensaver, my doggies.
And more doggies.
And we all have many screensavers, right? You got one on your computer, you got one on your tablet, you got one on your phone. My daughter in her Easter best, my 2-year-old, my daughter when she was 7, now she's 47, right? No, just kidding. Picture of my kids at Disneyland. Yeah, things that make us feel nice, right? That's what we have on our phone. My family, my husband, and my sons. Tiger Lily, children. My old school muscle car. Oh, that's fun. That's fun. Keep you connected to the past. 6 grandkids. Wow. 6 grandkids. Congratulations, LaShundria. You hardly look old enough.
Yeah.
Pink butterfly. Okay.
That's nice.
So I think I see the theme, things that we like, things that make us feel good, things that make us feel soothed and comforted. So hopefully starting the session with that in your mind is a good way to begin, kind of clear out whatever cobwebs came with you today. Helps me clear out mine for sure. So what are we going to do today? We're just like every week, we know a lot's happened since we saw you. It feels like this week especially, so much has gone on. So we'll recap the last session and we'll have the breakouts that we didn't get to at the end last time, because you seem to like to talk to each other and do these case discussions. So we'll give you a chance to do that. Then we're going to move into really talking about landlords and coordinating with landlords to support people maintaining their housing, prevent eviction. And then, as I mentioned already, we're going to talk about a harm reduction plan to prevent eviction. And I know you guys out in California, you lead the country in harm reduction approaches. And this is really taking it through the lens of eviction prevention and what we can do to help people come up with other options that will maybe prevent them from losing their housing, but still enable them to, get their needs met. And then we'll wrap up the session. So that's what we're going to do. We'll have a conversation in the middle and we'll have another breakout towards the end. I see a couple things popped in the chat.
One of them was the slides and the other was my youngest daughter and my grandchildren.
Okay, great. And then Andrea, if you'll just pop the breakouts in because I'm getting ready to set that up. That would be great. Okay. All right. Anybody have anything they want to say before we jump into the recap? So I will move there. What did we talk about last week? A lot has happened. I know you guys are busy. So much is going on. But last week, we really went deep on the phases. We went through what are the tasks of phase 1, as people transition into their new housing from wherever they were before, whether it was the car or the shelter. And that's all about settling in and creating new resources and making sure people understand what it means to be a tenant. And you guys had a lot of interest in the teaching of tenancy skills and bringing that to the practice. Some of you are doing it already. Even if it's done before people move into housing, it's really important to reinforce what a lease means once people are in housing, because they're really in a different headspace between those two places. Then we talked about phase 2, which is after people have been housing for a couple months, 2 to 3 months. And us as workers stepping back a little bit, letting the network of care provide more support for people, making sure those connections are working, maybe adjusting the connections. Maybe they didn't like the AA meeting they picked, or maybe they didn't like that pickleball team that they joined, which is full of old farts or something like that. So we might need to adjust those linkages. And then always keeping our eye on how are they doing in their housing? Are they paying their rent? Are they, engaging in, behavior that allows everybody to enjoy their homes, which is really a standard tenancy obligation? How are they doing on their housing? And then phase 3, step back again and start to step down and prepare people for ending CTI. Now, I know sometimes you guys might end up with some of your clients. We know a lot of you said that it's a kind of the goal is around 6 months, but it's getting longer. Sometimes it's longer, depends on the case. Even if you're working with people for longer and continuing to provide case management, you still would end the CTI intervention after the 6 to 9 month period and step down and have a final meeting with the participant to really review their progress, to develop a plan for going forward, and then also to talk about, how they experienced your services. Really give people an opportunity to do what we've been talking about with all their other resources, which is to evaluate their services and learn how to give feedback and also get their needs met. And also for us to learn from the people we work with. So that's what we did. And we did 2 group discussions for that. And phase 3 case discussions is what we're going to start with today. So it should be a nice bridge between sessions. We'll see how good the bridge is. But first, we have a lot of polls for you today. Keep you popping, I guess. I don't know what the word is on the polls. So we've got a poll for you now. And I had it all queued up, and then I realized I was in the wrong room. Okay, here we go. Here is the poll. First poll of the day. Get ready. Here it comes. Which aspects of, I know some of you might be on the phone, so I'll read it. Are you incorporating, which aspects of CTI are you already incorporating into your work? And this is a multiple choice question, and it has a lot of options, 10 of them. So we'll give you a little more time to read everything. I'll just pick the highlights. Helping people address lease violations, tenant goal and recovery focus, focused assessment, focused service planning, learning more about homeless history, connecting people to a network of care, developing resource lists with people, teaching tenancy and self-advocacy skills, coordinating with landlords and property managers, helping people develop structure and purpose in their lives. So it is a long list. I did manage to read it all. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to push the buttons that you like. Okay. You're getting there. We've got 16 out of 25. So I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. I know you get distracted. The email pops, the text pops, the client comes in the door. We know how it is. All right, I think we had enough time. We'll end the poll. We got 19 out of 25, which is pretty good. I'm going to share the results. Excuse me. So we see really a lot of you are already incorporating a lot of things from CTI into your work. Top things is helping people develop a structure and purpose in their lives, connecting people to a network of care. Those were 84s. Then right after that is teaching advocacy skills, self-advocacy, amazing. And then we have a lot of you doing more focus in your planning and housing history. And also helping address lease violations, which is great. Terrific. So you're already doing a lot of CTI, and now you can call it CTI. and talk about it in your programs that you're doing critical time intervention. I think it helps to have a framework that you can talk about it. Also, I don't know if any of you are involved in trying to raise money for your programs, but since it is an evidence-based practice, tell your development people you're doing it, because that's something that people like to fund, is evidence-based practices. So those of you who have private fundraising in your organizations, make sure you toot the horn, because you're already doing it, and probably you'll be doing more as you move forward, we hope, and as it works for you, if it works for you. Okay. So now we're going to move into the breakout discussions for phase 3. So we have examples for you. We sent them to you. Andrea also just put them in the chat box because it's kind of a long question, rather than she put the document in there so you can open it. Let us know if you have any trouble. But the questions are: always introduce yourselves, get to know some people, discuss the barriers to housing stability, what concerns you have about the person following their lease and maintaining housing. Like, what are you worried about? What are the behaviors you're seeing? What kinds of things need to happen for people to maintain housing stability after CTI ends, right? Because we're in the ending phase with people in phase 3. And, you know, what interventions would you use to help the person address these issues? Those are prompts. We know, you know, we don't expect you to go one by one through those questions. We certainly expect you to hopefully talk about the housing stability and supports that you find necessary. But if, you know, it's other questions you want to discuss in your groups, feel free. And we have 3 people, or 3 households to discuss. First is Josh, and I'm just going to quickly read them so everybody can hear about them and think about it. And when you get in your breakout group, you can figure out who you want to talk about. So this gives you a little time to ponder it. Josh has been doing really well in housing. His apartment's clean and organized. He pays his rent. He's cooking part-time in a restaurant. He's connected with employment services. He goes to the doctor. His blood pressure is under control. Model citizen, right? He's off his medication for his depression with his doctor's approval. And he wants to buy a car. Marijuana is always present in his blood work. He also likes boxed wine. He's not really interested in treatment right now, and he says he enjoys having a glass of wine or 2 with a smoke in the evenings. Nothing wrong with that. No related lease violations related to that either. So that's Josh. Then we have Keisha, who has 2 kids that are 8 and 10. She lived with her husband, and she was a stay-at-home mom. Then her husband died, and they lost their house. They stayed with her mother, but it was too crowded, and eventually Keisha ended up in a shelter. They have some TANF and they have some Social Security, and that's it. He's just got a job. It's part-time, so she has some time to be with the kids. The kids are struggling, though. They lost their father, their neighborhood, their friends, everything. They had a little trouble in school, a little bit of acting out, but they have now gotten into family therapy, and things are beginning to stabilize, which is good, right? Kids that go through a transition too, not just the adults, right, as they move into housing. Financially, it's a struggle, but they're making it. The kids are beginning to settle. They're able to spend some time with their grandparents. Keisha bought a car, though, that's in frequent need of repair. This month, she has to pay the rent and is not opening to discussing the cost of the car and how that's getting in conflict with the rent. She insists they need it and that you just don't understand if you don't pay her rent. Okay, and then we have Mahdi, who had been doing well in housing. He initially had some troubles with budgeting, but he's gotten much better. He's paid his rent on time for the last 3 months. He's been talked about wanting a family, a girlfriend and a family and kids. Early on, he's made some questionable relationship choices and has been hurt. And that also led to some of his budgeting problems, giving the person in the relationship some of his money, leading to problems paying the rent. He now has a girlfriend for 2 months, and she has several children. He would like to move them in and become a family. Any of these resonate with you guys? People similar to issues you're struggling with, things that are going on? Yes, I'm seeing a few nodding heads, some of the faces I can see. Okay, good. So hopefully it won't be too difficult to make a selection and have a good conversation. We will give you 10 minutes, and we apologize in advance for interrupting you. That's our job, to keep us, moving. We will give you a warning, and I'm going to put you into rooms of around 4 to 5 people. I know sometimes you can't all join because you are pulled away. And anybody who has trouble, just come back to the main room. Andrea and I will be here, and we can, get you back in if you're having any issues. Okay, everybody ready? Next button hitting exercise to join the breakout group.
Just make sure that you can download that the breakout page that we downloaded. Yeah.
Okay. The rooms are open.
Good.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I see some of you smiling. You had a nice conversation. You talked to some people who were interesting, that you liked, about interesting things that you do every day, and working with people who have, lots of things going on in their lives, right? But we love them. So did anybody, I'll just read, the questions are up here. We wanted to really talk about the housing stability barriers and how you would overcome them. So that's what I'm gonna say. Did anybody talk about Josh? Yes, does anybody want to share? Okay, JC jumped right in, so saying she loved her group.
No. I was with Delisha, Myra, and Unique. So if they want to jump in,
I meant you jumped right in, and how great your group was when you came back. That was the first thing you said.
Okay, I mean, I saw the middle, how you set it up, where you're seeing kind of the mirror in the background. I would just roll with it. Okay.
I think somebody may
Bye.
be talking on
Alicia.
the phone. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So anybody want to talk about Josh? What about Josh? What are you worried about in terms of his housing stability? How would you approach it? Thoughts about that? Don't be shy on us now all of a sudden. We're week 4, like we never met you before.
Well, we were thinking.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, JC.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi.
Truth, if I could just be very transparent here, reading Josh, I'm like, that's everybody that I know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody smokes weed, it's normal. And everybody has a glass of wine every now and then. I think what our concern with, and Myra, Unique, and Delisha, please jump in, is the fact that, the word that stuck out for me, was it his depression or his medication for depression. So identifying when that does happen, how to support him and how to respond to that, and to make sure that he practices self-care in that, because the medication piece is very important. Because if he goes into a depression and he's smoking, the weed and drinking, those can counteract. So making sure that we identify it, spot on, because remember, we're in CTI, we're not always going to be there. So how do we help identify that need for when this does happen? Because that really stuck out for us all about the depression piece.
Yep.
And so that would make sense about the closing meeting, and what are the concerns going forward, and how do you know when you're in trouble, right? That's all about phase 3, is really helping people think about the kinds of challenges they've had and how they're going to handle them going forward. So that's great. Does anybody else want to? I think Sarah and Delisha tried to talk about Josh too. Do you guys have comments about him?
Shelby had a comment here. Let's see. Our group talked about focusing on identifying with Josh's goals and priorities, like buying the car, and focus less on the alcohol and substance abuse. Yep. So in the progress towards getting a car, he'll probably have to save up money, right? And you want to look at how that interferes, and that's a great one.
And also looking at his priorities, finding out what his priorities are. Is the weed and the wine more important than buying the car and the job, or the medical history? So also getting a person to admit to whether they have a problem or not with the drugs and alcohol, and then also figuring out what his priorities are.
What about the housing risks? What are you worried about with this housing? Anybody talk about the girlfriend moving in and, the relationship?
I was from Madi, though,
talked
right?
about smoking in the house, right? So
Smoking ordinance.
you could smoke, but just don't smoke in the house, right? And sure, he's having wine, but when the wine turns into a fifth of vodka, then maybe we should have a conversation. If it becomes excessive, you know, we want to take that trauma-informed approach to have a discussion to see if things have changed in his life and, you know, how he could be supported through something he may be going through.
Sorry,
So
I
make it-
confused Ma D into that. Yep.
Crisis.
Well, and I think having, like you said, a frank conversation with him about the concern. Lots of people smoke a joint, have a glass of wine, and they work and they maintain their housing, right? But we want to make sure we have a better understanding. We also want to use whatever we know about his history of where things have been difficult in him maintaining housing, right? And so we don't know for sure that that's affected his housing. It doesn't look like it from what we know, but we certainly want to pay attention on that. I'm going to move us on. Anybody talk about Keisha? No takers on Keisha? Nobody wants to share? Again, you get shy on us.
Our group we did speak about Keisha and how she just had a lot of barriers with all the things going on with the deaths and, you know, the kids and a lot of trauma. So definitely, you know, help her folk. I think what's her name? That was in my room. She JC. She said to you know, help focus and get her some support with the children, and maybe that can kind of relieve some things for her. But
Absolutely. Great.
Yeah.
Great. Get her some support. So she's you know, being a single mom is a lot. A lot of demand. People need a break. So help her get some support so she can think clearly. What about the car? What about the car? Because the car right now is causing her not to pay rent, but the car might be the way she gets to work, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
what do we think about the car?
We tapped in a little bit more, Suzanne, because when we figured she was staying with the grandparents, if they own the home and if we're in a rapid rehousing program, I'm just thinking big here. If they're in rapid rehousing and they own the home, we can potentially, you know, support in the interim to pay the rent towards the, you know, the grandparents. If they own the home, that way she can free up some money to fix her car. I being a single parent, when I read this, I was like, oh my God. You know, she has a lot of, and then, you know, supporting the children in their grief and their mourning, because as a mother, that's her worry, you know, are her children. And then you said she has TANF and some Social Security, and that's it. But mainly just ensuring that she has the direct support that she needs for the entire family's mental health. But I coming from a rapid rehousing program, I would have said, do your parents own the home? Because if they do, we have temporary financial assistance. Yes.
So you went right to solving the housing crisis, right?
Yep.
And understanding that she needs the car, right? And that it is her priority for whatever reason. And one thing you might want to be talking with her about is, so is there a better car, right? Going longer term, should she maybe try to save up for a car? If you guys pay the rent for a few months, is there a way? Because I know in California, in a lot of places, if you don't have a car, you're not going to work, right? I mean, or it takes you 2 hours each way. But helping her have, first of all, if she has some childcare, she can calm down and maybe think a little bit and maybe make a plan. And I don't know if there are car repair programs either. And I know that some communities actually have funds for that, for poor people. I don't know if there's anything like that, but also trying to connect her up to additional resources that might support that. Great, great. All right, and just talk a little now. Mahdi, who is in my head, is number one, but he's number 3. Anybody talk about Mahdi? This is the guy who wants to move his girlfriend in. Sometimes gives too much money to his beloved. Okay, Ms. D. Scruggs, go ahead.
Yeah.
We talked about Mahdi, how he needs to just start. He needs to put himself on a budget plan and start paying attention to how he's budgeting. And like he wants to start a family. He has a girlfriend that has children already. Now it's only been 2 months into the relationship, but getting them together to sit down. Lakeisha from China, she mentioned to get them together to sit down to find out their financial goals, what their financial obstacles are. Start making a budget plan between both of them. Since she has children, what is her income? based on, do she get TANF? Do she get CalWorks? And if her kids are old enough to go to school, childcare, after school program, things of that nature, because that's gonna play a major part in their living financially and their living togetherness and financial role. And if he wants to, and he speaks of wanting to have a family. How many children does she have? Can he afford? Can they both? Can he afford her living with him, and just which is going to affect his financial budget and putting them in either in a debt or something. Hopefully not, but just pay attention to helping them maintain their budget, put their money together, and find out what are their goals financially, and sit down and make realistic goals with them for the next 3 months.
So that's great. Really focused on, you didn't like say, Madi, you shouldn't have this girlfriend.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, he shouldn't, but I mean,
But you didn't say that. And you know what? We
No.
don't know if he should or he shouldn't, you know, right? Like we never know.
Right, because I mean,
And that's why you didn't go there. You said,
Right.
let's look at this together with you, with your partner, your girlfriend, whatever you want to, they call each other, and look at how it works financially. And thinking about the end of CTI, we do want to talk with people about having enough money to live on. And I know it's called budgeting, but clients hate the word budgeting,
Yeah,
right?
they
Like
hate
it's like you say the word budget and they're like, oh, thank you. I don't think I have time today to talk to you, right? Because nobody wants to talk about spending only a little bit of money, but we do want to talk about money and financial planning and how can you get more income and what can you afford given what you have. And if they wanted more, what could they do? Could he work more? Are there other resources they could bring to bear? You went right to a problem solving place with them, right? To really think about financially how it's going to work. I think one thing also with Madi is maybe in the one-on-one with him to have some conversation with him as you closing out in CTI about how in other relationships in the past, he's been taken advantage of financially, because you know that, and
Yeah.
asking how he's going to keep himself safe going forward, right? And
Right.
making a plan with him so that when you're doing that budgeting, I'll call it the B word. When you're doing the B word with him, the budgeting, right? You can talk about what happens if it doesn't work financially, right? And
Right.
if there are struggles and how much they need to work, you know, whether there is going to be him subsidizing this and whether he can afford that, and really having an evaluative conversation with him about those costs, but also about his tendency to overdo things and, you know, how he's not going to get himself into a hole, right? Because that's what caused the hole before. And we know that. So we have all this information on people about their housing history, and we know it squeezes their budget. And we know what makes them not pay their rent. And it's important in phase 3 that we have no judgment. Just, we know this has happened. Let's talk about preventing it from happening again in the future.
A really good point, because you guys didn't fall into the trap. I don't know if you've ever talked about, I even think about members of my family. You ever tried to talk somebody out of a relationship? How'd that go? Right? So that people don't really respond really well. So going with it, JC was saying, you know, the conversation that Suzanne was describing, you want to have a conversation with him and make sure he's okay, right? And talk to him about the other relationships.
Yep.
And, you know, really give him permission to prioritize himself and see how that goes. Okay, now it's not wrong. Randolph. Okay, thank you. You read my mind.
Well, I was reading the chat.
Yeah, you should always check in about what's going on with their children. Yes, as children are involved in a relationship, you want to check in on that.
Yep. So we want to definitely assess the relationship. I think if we tell Madi no, not to
Forget
go
it.
ahead with the girlfriend, we're going to lose him. And we know that. Like we want to raise our concerns if we have them, absolutely. But working with him to his goals is going to help enable us to even have a conversation with him when it does maybe not work out as great as he thought, or he is finding that she maybe is taking advantage of him. He'll see us as an ally and be able to work with us around that. So great stuff. I'm glad you guys had such good conversations, and you're really getting phase 3, right? Like phase 3 is we're ready to let go of the little butterfly, you know, kind of thing, and move on and really have a good plan with them. Okay, handing it over
Yep.
to Andrea right now.
Yep.
Switching gears.
Let's talk a little bit about coordinating for housing stability and the roles of the landlord and the roles of the services, because they're distinct and they're functionally separated. So one of the things that we want landlords to do is really keep an eye on the lease and enforce the lease consistently across the board and with forethought, so that we want an assertive approach. We want to tell people when they're violating the lease. We don't want to let that go. You know how that goes. Somebody has their 10th party and they say, okay, I'm done. Well, we want people to, you know, respect that these are tenants, and we want to really respond at the first party to give people a chance to clear up the violation. And we want to really establish clear and consistent tenancy obligations, and you can only do that by really enforcing them consistently. For the services staff, you know, they're arranging for housing, they're helping people maintain them. The role is distinctly different from landlords. And I will say that this often gets confused. Sometimes landlords say, you know, he had his 10th party, you need to go talk to him. Well, we want to ask, did they write him anything? Did they write him a lease violation? Did they make the demand? Because when services starts to make the demand in housing, there's confusion about the role, and you give up part of your case management role. So we want to really encourage landlords to do that. And we really want to help problem solve with people about how they can meet the expectations of tenancy and still maintain their integrity and their goals. We want to help people meet the tenancy obligations. We want to base it on some tenancy skills that we've talked to them about, and we want to teach them negotiating skills. And that may mean mentoring them for negotiating skills, talking to the landlord with them, and then debriefing it and saying, what part of that could you do? Okay, let's go to the next one. So what we're trying to accomplish was we're trying to make an agreement between competing forces, right? The priorities of landlords and the priorities of services are distinctly different, but they're one single priority, which is to help people be good tenants. Landlords want good tenants. We want people to be good tenants. So we're going to help people do that. There's often demands about security and community versus the individual. We may ask people to maybe change a little of their process or wait a little while. If we have somebody who really needs to be stabilized on medication, and we may say, can you give us 10 days, those sorts of things. We want to really, strike a balance and realize that the landlord has to really answer to all the tenants in the building. We want to foster a collaborative relationship and recognize that we're all working towards people being good tenants. Landlords want good tenants. There's reasons for that. They meet their obligations, they maintain the building, right? All of these things. And that we want good tenants because we want people to have some choice in housing as they move forward. And good tenancy skills really supports that. We've actually gotten landlords to write people a letter after they have followed the lease for 3-month periods and say, you know, this is a good tenancy letter, and it really motivates people to maintain that tenancy. They like it. Sometimes they frame it and put it on their wall, which sort of breaks my heart, but also I understand what's behind it. We want to coordinate actively with landlords. So that's the part about making sure we check in with landlords on a regular basis. The recommendation is once a month. And that we want to really differentiate and really think about the role of the housing locator. If the housing locator is going to check in with the landlords, how do we check in with the housing locator? And how do we make sure that that we get all the information that we need to give tenants feedback, but also to encourage landlords to be assertive on tenancy? And that we all want a building that'll be an asset to the community, not a liability. We want tenants to stay there, and we want to understand the goals of housing. And we need to articulate that to landlords, because sometimes they think we're just an advocate for one person. We are primarily the advocate for the person we serve, but the person is better served if it's a safe building and it's well run. So we appreciate that. Okay, let's go to the next one. So how do we manage the collaboration? We make sure that we understand each other's roles. And the most delicate part of that is we will support you, but that does not mean we are going to make tenancy demands on people. It's not normal for a social worker to come to somebody's house and say, okay, you really need to pay your rent. And we want to train people to be a tenant anywhere in the community. So we want landlords to assume that role, which is really theirs. We want to really get input. We want to protect people's confidentiality, but we want to open it up for landlords to talk to us. So there's a simple trick that we use is that, the landlord says, I'll give you one of the landlord I worked with. He said to me, what's wrong with them anyway? And you really can't answer that question. So I can't really answer that in the specific, but tell me what you're worried about. We want to encourage landlords to talk about this. We want clear procedures about communications. We want to think about confidentiality. We want to know what the eviction prevention process is. How can we stop an eviction? How can we help intervene when people are in the process of eviction? We want to talk about lease violations and how they're going to be handled. We also want to talk about crisis procedures in the building. A big thing is, why can't you come to the house if there's a problem at midnight? Well, we don't work at midnight, but what would you do with any other tenant? Okay, if you do that, we will follow up after this happens, but we're not going to come out in the middle of the night. So it's landlords understanding our role and not having expectations of something that we're really not going to do, because then they're disappointed. We want to ask them to copy us on lease file. First of all, we want them to write lease violations. And then we want to ask them to copy us on the lease violations. But usually we get that information when we check in with them and on a monthly basis. There's a resource here. You can see the link and you have the PowerPoint slides, so you can click on this link. It's called the Property Manager's Manual. It's written by CSH, but an important part is in the appendix, they have sample letters for landlords. So I don't know if this has ever come up with you, but landlords have said to me, okay, I'll write them a letter, but you write the letter. Well, how about we give you something that you can put on your computer and you can just plug people's names on, right? And we know this is appropriate. So this has been really helpful. So we're going to launch a poll about coordination with landlords. And do you want me to do it?
I'm ready. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I was on mute, but I said I was ready.
Okay.
All right, time
So-
to get your fingers working again.
Yep. So this is a single choice. Do you feel that your work with property managers or landlords is effective at helping people maintain or access tenancy? Yes, very, most of the time, sometimes, not usually, not at all.
And you want to read the second question too?
Yep, I do. Want to give
Can you see
people a
it?
minute. Yep, I see it. So, people are more driven to the second question. Sorry, it's moving.
Which
on
of
me.
the following issues with property management landlords
you.
do you see as challenges in your work? Clarity on roles of service staff versus property management, rules aren't clear, inconsistency in applying the rules or the terms of the lease by the landlord, gaps in communication, safety concerns, other, feel free to type in the chat box if there are other issues that you're seeing, or none. We're always ready for there to be a perfect relationship with the property management people, but hardly ever happens, unfortunately. Okay, we got about half of you in now, so we'll give it a few more seconds. So it's it's 2 questions. It's long. I see something in the chat has already popped up.
Yep.
At Hope Solutions, our navigators do most of this, not the case manager. I am the case manager. Oh, Randolph, I don't know if you're willing to unmute and maybe talk about that. Do you have separate roles? Because sometimes I think if the case manager is really going to be the enforcer of the lease, then people don't see them as their advocate. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, this is Randolph, Rob, whatever you call me, whatever you want.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, dancing a tightrope, you know, because occasionally case managers do run into the property manager or landlord. And, you know, you have to make sure what you're saying is the same thing the housing navigator is saying and stuff.
Mhm.
So, you know, when that does happen, I just say, well, you know, I will let our housing navigator know this right away. Because I want you to get whatever questions you have answered right away.
I can see, great. So the housing navigator and the case manager are different in your system,
Yeah.
and the housing navigator is really the one who keeps up with the landlord, responds
Yeah.
to issues that come up with them. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good example too, because people often do have multiple people working with them, and it's a great CTI intervention because we gotta, you know, we don't
Yep.
want two of us calling the landlord. Now that's just gonna tick that landlord off, right? They're busy enough. I'm sure you're using, probably like many of Rapid Rehousing, a combination of mom and pops and then big property management companies, right? So there's really very different and varying responses. I'm ending the poll and I'm sharing the results, but I also see something popped in the chat.
Yep. Finding new landlords with multiple units to agree to our documents and processes, in addition to getting them to agree to rent to someone with likely multiple barriers, can be difficult at times. Yes, that initial, and California's housing costs versus wages are in consideration as well. Yep. So, Nicholas, you are at Hope Solutions, so you use the housing navigators. That's actually a really promising practice. Is a lot of people are using people who are used to working with landlords, so they're better at negotiation, and that helps sometimes. Is that something that you're using, and is that helpful, or are you going out looking for units and having a problem with that?
Well, I couldn't quite hear the first bit. Was I utilizing what?
The housing navigators. Are the housing navigators effective at finding those units?
I am a housing navigator, so I'd like to say yes.
Great. Okay, that's great. That's a
Uh,
good thing.
I believe we are, and my personal opinion on our agency is excellent. Like, I think everybody in this agency is amazing.
Yep.
But I think everybody has their own go-to methods and processes. What I found, I've been doing this for a year now, is finding property management or a landlord who regularly has a couple of units available. Because yeah, once they're familiar with you, then you already know the processes. It's not a negotiation. It's moreover just talking about the client, the barriers, and if they'll accept them in the application, which speeds it up quite a bit versus potentially a couple weeks to a month of back and forthing with somebody new. And that could be even for just one unit if it's a private owner. So
yeah, it's much more efficient if you have a landlord with a couple of units.
Well, and the availability of your support is something, and I just want to say I've heard what everybody's talking about the markets. Thank God we're getting a little cooling in some markets, but I don't know if you're getting any out in California. In general, your market's hot all the time, just like your weather recently. But that the support that you guys provide is something that other tenants don't come with, and that's really, like Nick, I heard Nick saying that, because the landlord knows you, and once they know you, and that you get over that hump with people. But it is a barrier. We are reliant on landlords who either want to do a little good, which, believe it or not, there are some out there, and also maybe sometimes landlords, and I wanted to mention this because sometimes people don't have great choices because they have bad credit histories, they're living in housing, they're living with landlords who aren't the ideal landlord that Andrea was just talking about, right? They don't keep the drug dealers off the property, they don't enforce the rules. And so sometimes, we are kind of telling the landlord to do their job in thhere properties. So we should look at the poll results. You wanted to look at that, Andrea?
There we go. So here we go. Do you feel
41% of you see? Go ahead. Okay.
Do you feel like your work with property managers and landlords is effective at helping people maintain housing? So 41% said yes, very, which is great. And 35%, right, which is 76% of all of you, said most of the time. So that's good. 18% said sometimes, and one person said not at all. So that might be something to take a look at and maybe talk to people who are housing navigators about really dealing with landlords. The other thing that Suzanne said is, yeah, sometimes we're forced to use landlords who have the sort of subpar properties because they're more likely to take people with multiple barriers. And the trick there is working with them to improve their units and improve their landlord skills. And we can offer them some resources to do that. And the property management manual is one. The other one that we've used is your local HUD office probably has some winterization funds, those sorts of things, or, you know, making units more efficient. That sometimes helps landlords. So having a couple of those in your pocket can really help, but also really highlighting how beneficial it is to have a case manager who works with people towards it. So people said that the clarity on roles with service staff versus property management, about 53% said that was a big issue. We should talk about that. And it goes with that gaps in communication, which was always 59%. The rules aren't clear. Yep. Is that the rules for the lease, we have to make sure that those are clear and that the landlords are consistent. And that goes with there's inconsistency applying the rules or the terms of the lease. So it's working with landlords and deciding who does that in order to be able to enforce the lease. And in fact, to accept a subsidy, people are expected to uniformly and consistently apply the lease. The other thing is safety concerns. That's a problem, and landlords are responsible for those safety concerns. And so those are the big ones. And then the things that people talked about. And it makes me think like it might be helpful to take a look at the next discussion and move to that, because I think
Debbie just wanted, there's something popped in the chat. Landlords have had a horrible experience in the past with Section 8 and our service providers. So sometimes you're dealing with that when you're trying to negotiate with a landlord. And you know, trying to say, well, but we're different. Hey, wait, don't put us in that bucket, right? I think the thing about the clarity of roles, you know, a lot of you are probably using landlords who don't really know what the rapid rehousing case manager's role is, especially if they're new. Those who do know, they know, because that's why they take your clients or your participants again another time. But really telling people about those roles that we talked about, and we kind of see it as good cop, bad cop, although we never want to use that language with the landlord because we don't want to say we want you to be the bad cop. Very bad. And cop is, of course, a very laden term, but you get the dynamic where we need them to be the rule enforcer and we are really the support to help the person meet the rules. And if we don't have that dynamic where the expectation is put out by the landlord and they expect us to collect the rent or get the person to change their behavior, it really becomes problematic. So we have to educate them. We have to explain how it works. And as Andrea said, we're going to do some more talking about that in the next slide. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll and let us move ahead.
So the questions are, and these are just questions to think about, is what kinds of lease violations are you seeing or are people receiving? What are the roles clear about? That's what we were just talking about. Which staff enforce the lease and which staff support the tenants to meet these requirements? And that's really the differentiation. And then what are some of the challenges that you face in supporting tenants, coordinating with landlords to support stable tenancy? So it sounds like that some of the landlords don't really understand what the worker's role is, and clarifying that for them can be really helpful. Also pointing out that Section 8 doesn't usually come with case management, and in this case it comes with case management, so they have somebody who is working with them to improve tenancy, and really reiterating that people being good tenants is something that we strive to achieve because it gives people much more choices in the long run. Other thing, what's coming up? What are you seeing? What are the lease violations coming up? I can give you some examples of what come up in other places.
Let's pause for a second and see.
Yeah. Delisha, did you want to say something? I saw you. Come on. Okay. Felix, what do you think? Oh, here we go. Teresa put in the chat, unauthorized guest noise. Yep. and dumping items outside the unit. Why is that always a big thing? I think it's a big change from when people are on the streets and where to put garbage. And it is guaranteed to make the landlords absolutely nuts.
Teresa,
So,
do you want to talk about that at all?
yep. You got to
Whatever,
unmute.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah, it just depends on, the situation. Sometimes they're clearing out their unit and like you said, they don't know what to do, so they just immediately put it out on the curb, right? Or they'll put these big bulky items out in the trash enclosure instead of reaching out. For me personally, I'm a property manager, so we assist with those things, right?
Mhm.
We'll do dump runs and we'll try to coordinate that so we don't have that problem.
So how
Right,
do you
but
put
people
that?
don't know what to do. You said that, right? Like that's
Mhm.
really a common reason. We don't want people to break their lease by accident because they don't understand the rules and they didn't
Right.
know that they couldn't, put the recliner on the sidewalk or whatever. So we have to tell people what the rules are, right? And how
Mhm.
do you deal with that?
And for our multi-site programs, which we are the master leaser of the
Yup.
unit, and then we sublease to our residents, there are house
Ah.
rules. There are things that we discuss with them when we're going over the lease, and that is one of them. So we try to kind reminder, and if we see it, we'll address it, and then we'll just let them know not to do it again. If there's something you need help with, let's work on trying to, making a dump run and gathering the items at once, taking them out of your unit instead of you putting them out.
And that brings planfulness. Do you work with case managers to put that in place and remind people? And is that effective?
We definitely collaborate. We are a team. Yes, it does work.
Great.
Sometimes.
Yeah, well, nothing works all the time, right? But yeah, no, that's great.
So guest was
people-
also mentioned there. I don't know if
Yeah.
people are, other folks, again, you got shy on us. What are you seeing in terms of the lease violations? Is it mostly just the issues is non-payment? I know when you're working with families, sometimes it might be children who might be causing lease
Yeah.
violations because they're not following some of the rules. Or guests. Oh, I see Ms. D Scruggs, but
Yeah.
having abandoned cars on people's property, right? Because that's not disposing of things, it may be creating a safety hazard there. But people may not understand why that's, they can't just have that. It's where I live. Why can't I have my car? Just like,
Yep.
why can't I have my guest? Right? Because
Yeah.
properties, go ahead, Ms. D.
I wanted to say, like, for instance, like sometimes when you have multiple units or when you have like a fourplex, that it goes upon each tenant's responsibility to be responsible for your guests, their parking situations. If it's not parking on the property for guests, then they have to make sure they find parking for themselves on their own. And also being respectful for the tenants, all the tenants that's on the property, because at the end of the day, everyone has to live there, everyone has to live together, regardless of, no, I don't talk to them, but you still got to see that person every morning. So, or every evening when you come in, it's just the fact of just being respectful. And that's part of the that's part of the landlord tenant consent when you have a fourplex or something like that, just being mindful and being respectful for other people,
Sure.
for your
Yeah.
neighbors.
And people
Well, it
may
is a
not know
lease
that, right?
violation, it's a lease requirement to allow others the peaceful enjoyment of their home. And if you persist in disturbing someone over and over, that's called a nuisance, and that can be ultimately grounds for eviction. I mean, it takes a long
Yep.
time in your state, in our state, for that to happen. I just want to read a couple things that came up in the chat, Andrea. Okay.
So go ahead. All right. So animals, noise, guests, animals. That's a new one. Tampering with property. Yeah. Any damage to property, parking, mail, and garbage. Yep. Those are all coming up, and we're going to come back to this. I just want to smoking in the units.
Smoking in the
Michael,
unit.
that's
Oh my
come up a
goodness.
lot. That's a hard one. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then clients claiming not to know they have to pay a portion of the rent. Yeah, yes, people like to say that, you know, they want an apartment where they don't have to pay rent. I don't know about an apartment like that, but that might be something. And it also is confusing to people when they have zero income and then they get income that then they have to pay rent. That's another confusion there, and we'll talk about that. So we've got noise complaints again, non-payment of rent, smoking, and unauthorized guests. Yep, guests are always an issue. And holding clients, holding clients to a higher standard than other tenants. So I'm not sure what that means. I see JC has her hand up, but I want to hear from Felix. What, can you give an example?
Sometimes I've just dealt with tenants kind of holding all clients to a higher standard than other tenants they work with, right? So another tenant might leave trash out or have those same complaints and issues, but our clients are the ones getting the landlord complaints, right? And the other tenants really don't care about the other tenants, and they try to focus it all on our clients because they know the homeless or they know they're with the agency.
Yep.
I don't know if that helps.
And that's, yeah, that definitely helps. And that's a big problem, right? Because if it's not consistent, the tenants, rightfully so, will say, how come George can leave his stuff out and nobody says anything and I can't? And that's where it goes to that consistency. And it may be that they have somebody to complain about too, when besides the tenant. And you want to talk to them about that. And you also want to talk to them about, you know, you're working with people to improve that behavior, but it's difficult when it looks like everybody else is able to do it. And maybe you can work with them on a strategy to get everybody to comply. Sometimes we really need to help landlords sort of figure that out, but it's problematic and they should know that it's a different thing. You know, if not everybody has to follow the same rules, it's very difficult to help people see why they have to follow the rules.
JC's hands up.
Yep. JC, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I agree with all of what was in the chat, but I also would like to kind of reflect back to, especially if they're getting a mainstream voucher, EHB voucher, Section 8, anything that's subsidized, that all of the above that's listed to really remind the partner that, remember, one, these vouchers are very, very difficult to obtain. So to hold on to them is your job. The second thing is that there's also an addendum in their briefing that we really hold dearly, because a lot of our folks come from places not meant for human habitation, and they've come from congregate shelters, so they have the mindset of the group versus a single living, so that their guests can impact their ability to maintain their housing, that and not paying your utilities. So with all of these things, just to constantly revisit all of these things that were noted in this chat. You can lose your voucher. How about that? You can lose your voucher, and vouchers at 30%, especially for those that don't have any income. The vouchers right now in subsidized housing right now is like gold. So, you know, hand-holding and reminding the partner the importance of adhering to that lease expectation is really the job in this work for all of the things listed in this chat.
Yeah, and it's really important what you said about reminding people, both in a reactive way when they're breaking the lease, showing them where it is in the lease, and reminding them that the compliance with the lease is really important to maintaining their voucher. But the other part of this is reminding the landlord that we need to work together to make sure that people understand that this is part of it.
It's a partnership.
Yeah, the other thing is that sometimes, you know, they do read the lease to people. When people get vouchers, they read the lease to them, that sort of thing. They explain all the things, but people hear nothing during those interviews, right?
But they hear that what they will hear is, you may lose your voucher.
Yeah, we want to be careful. You know, a lot of times people are very scared of losing their housing. And sometimes people make it happen because they just want to get the anticipation over, and that we've got to be careful about moving to that, because one of the things we want to do is talk to people about the benefits of keeping their voucher.
Absolutely.
Right? And long term. So that we need to be very careful about that, but we need to remind people about what the rules are. And just because they hear it in the briefing doesn't mean that they remember it. They're thinking, oh, I wonder who lives here. Oh, look at this person across the room. Oh, sometimes it's, oh, I'm going to put curtains up. Sometimes it's, oh, there's a liquor store down the street. Perfect. Sometimes it's all sorts of things. So they're excited about moving into the apartment and they may not fully comprehend the briefing. But
Well,
that's
and
a good
also
question.
when you have
Yeah.
a subsidy and you have a subsidized unit, you have two things that could go wrong. Something can go wrong and
Yep.
the landlord could evict you from that unit and you could keep your subsidy, but you could also lose your subsidy, right? So when
Yep.
we're doing tenant education, we want to make sure people understand those two things, right? And that there are rules that go with the PHA, that come with the subsidy, and that there are rules that the landlord has to enforce. And that sometimes when someone loses their housing and is evicted, some PHAs have a policy of terminating the vouchers. Others will be willing to keep the voucher open. It really differs. But it's all part of that education process and making sure people are aware. Because if you can keep a subsidy for a year, you can move pretty much almost anywhere you
Yep.
want.
Yep.
And if you can make it and not lose that subsidy, once your year is up, you can move. And that for a
Mhm.
lot of people is a real motivator to be a good tenant.
Mhm.
Because then they can take their subsidy and go wherever they want. They may, and because of the fact of the market, or they were homeless and they got the subsidy here, they're not tied forever to that place. And I know in particular in California, a lot of people, just like New York, are from other places. And, maybe are they're here now, but maybe they don't want to be here forever. I see a couple of other comments and I think I wanted to ask one other question. Transition period is very important to sustain housing. I just wondered, you guys have been very quiet complaining about landlords, given what we hear from other people. They're all very nice, we know. But are people receptive to you? Are the property managers or the landlords receptive to your check-ins, to working together around helping people maintain their housing? Or are they kind of hard to reach and disconnected? Or is it a big property management companies don't give a crap? Or, what's going on? Okay,
hear-
Ms. D. Scruggs. Oh,
Okay.
put her
Go ahead.
hand up.
Go ahead, Ms. D. Scrubs.
Hi, yeah, for like some property managers, getting a hold of them is somewhat of a struggle. Even if you email them and stuff like that, it's hard, it's like pulling teeth. But then some property managers going in, once the tenant has been in their unit for about a month or two, and sometimes there's maintenance issues. When maintenance issues occur, and the property and the case manager and the client, collaborate to talk with the property manager to get assistance for getting the maintenance issue handled. Sometimes going in, the property manager, they don't use professional people. They Band-Aid the issue and making sure that just to satisfy the client, or just to keep us quiet, and don't want to do the job right. And then the issue, when the property becomes either where they try to charge the tenant more money because of the property, because of the maintenance issues, because the landlord is not doing their part. And then you got some slumlords that don't want to do, they just want to rent the property, collect the check, and you do the maintenance. But if the tenant does the maintenance on the property, then that comes out of their rent, because the tenant is coming out their pocket to fix the property.
Yeah.
And people, and landlords try to throw that, some landlords try to throw that, or property managers try to throw that at tenants, because they said, well, you can get out, we can evict you and stuff like that. Not due to, if it's not the tenant's fault, and the tenant's didn't cause no damage to the unit, and the unit is damaged itself, and all they did was Band-Aid it. That's been becoming an issue. Some of our clients, some clients that's having, and that's crazy, because the property manager was quick to put the person out before they maintenance any issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that can be a problem. We can use some of the inspection process. We can use some of the subsidy people.
There's a comment in the chat that's also
I see
related,
it.
and I think it's a perfect
Yep.
thing to bring up while Ms. D. Scruggs's comment is that some landlords are not, JC says, some landlords are not comfortable that we understand tenant rights and California landlord tenant law. We
Yeah.
provide reminders of what people deserve, and it seems somewhat related to what you were talking about in terms of the expectations and rights and responsibilities. And people can often, a landlord will say, that's your responsibility and I'm kicking you out, and people will take that and move, like they'll just
Mhm.
go with it, right?
Yeah, not
Because the
knowing their-
landlord is
not
all
knowing their rights.
powerful. Right. And I think it's important. That comment is important because we are the advocate. And it was,
Mhm.
Andrea talked about that a couple slides ago. And we want landlords to know that before we need to be the advocate. We do not want landlords to find that out later when we need to help somebody get legal services because they're being harassed or they're proceeding with eviction. But we want, when we are orienting landlords to our role, explaining that, it is our job to help people stay in housing, to get advocacy, to get legal services. I am here as an advocate, but I want to work together with you. And the goal is that we are not in an adversarial relationship, but explaining that up front. But it does make landlords behave a little better, that you do know rights and responsibilities. And we have some resources coming up in the next couple of slides that we think also the participants should have, because if they're better informed about their rights and responsibilities as well, they're going to do better, right? So I see another comment about education, right? And that is really, really, really important.
And
it
we do a
sounds like
lot of the education in this transition period. It's true. And that is coming up, and that maybe it might be better if we just move to that here and talked about the education period. So that one of the things we want people to do is be stably housed, right? We know that that improves clinical outcomes, that improves the person's life, that improves their options and their choice. And we want people to learn to manage tenancy obligations so that there's a possibility that they can move on. It's not that everybody's going to move on. It is just, if people feel like they're stuck in one place forever, it's very hard to get them to connect to the place. And so you want to give people options. So that tenancy is key to that. So part of it is this active coordination between the staffs and having this separation of functions, but that problems that you've listed that threaten tenancy also motivate tenants to use their case management. And so that's an important thing. And it really defines the case management role, is we will help people address these problems and that we're not the ones enforcing them. So that's a really important component, because that gives us the leeway to teach these tenancy skills and do that sort of skill building so that people have more choices in the long run. So let's move to the next one. So we need to talk to people in a simplified way. I don't know how many people here have read their lease, but it's—
Put your hands up, put your hands up, or give us a thumbs up if you've read your lease from beginning to end when you rented an apartment. There's always a few. Yes, Alicia, thank you. Erin, I mean, my faith in humanity is restored.
Yep. JC says, yep. Felix says, yes. Okay. That's a lot, right? But most people don't.
You are the only 6 people in America who do that.
Yes.
But anyway, teasing, just teasing.
And it's often gobbledygook, right? So one of the things we got to talk to tenants about, these are the really important things about tenants, right? What does it mean to allow other people peaceful enjoyment? It allows them to be tenants just like anybody else, right? And just like the person we're talking to. So that means they can't be disturbed by noises after a certain time, that, you don't want to leave stuff in the hallway, which creates a fire hazard and other things. You don't, you want to treat people with respect in the building. You want to talk about what it means to allow people, peaceful enjoyment. I mean, that's a hard thing. Sometimes they have to revise leases to remind the landlord, yep, because landlords will indicate a date and not actually a move-in date. Yep. So, so Mr. Weiss here is saying my boss Conservator reads it and then tells me what to sign. Well, that's a good
My
system.
boss
too.
conservator slash wife
Yes.
reads it and then tells me to sign.
Okay. You're also required to make rent payments on time. And you know, this can be confusing to people. And why does the landlord need my money anyway? They've got all this money coming in from all the other tenants, and I really need this money. And you know what? This should be free. Okay, we want to have a conversation about that, about what landlords use the money for, about that's an expectation of tenancy, that's an expectation of all tenants, that's going to be an expectation in all future tenancies in the future, and that's something we want to work out. How do they keep the unit free, which came up as one of the things, free of health and safety hazards? What's that mean? There's all sorts of definition, like 3-foot paths to every means of egress, 3-foot paths around doors, 3-foot paths around kitchen stuff. Basically, we simplify it for people. Oftentimes we give people an idea. It's been very effective. We give people bins and say, look, you can use all the storage in your apartment, including the closet. If you have a closet you don't see the floor of your whole time living here, I don't really care, as long as the door closes. But you know what? We need to limit the amount of bins. You have to be able to move around your apartment. And the reason for that, it's a safety concern, right? You need to be able to get out in case of fire. There's, you know, clutter brings vermin, those sorts of things, and that disturbs other people's tenancy as well as your own. So we want to tell people the reasons and give them methods that they can follow that. What's criminal activity, right? What does it mean? And we want to talk about that. What is criminal activity and why can't you do it on the premises? And what it does to a building if somebody's dealing drugs or engaging in prostitution. And oftentimes people are afraid of the people that come in, right? And that disturbs other people's tenancies. So we want to explain that. And then keeping the utilities paid, which somebody mentioned, why is that? First of all, because it's dangerous to plug into somebody else's utilities. Second of all, you know, they always wonder how we know. I know how we know. It's because there's a big orange extension cord snaking out of their apartment. I mean, first of all, if you're not going to pay your utilities, buy a black extension cord or something else. Don't buy a big orange one. No, I'm kidding. It's dangerous. It's a fire hazard, right? These are the things that are expectations. And in fact, your subsidy says if you have your utilities cut off, you have to reconnect them within, it says 30 days in New York, but you have a limit, and what resources we have to help people that. So we just want to go a little deeper on.
And I think that this is a great tool to educate tenants about what their obligations are. That's much simpler. I just want to highlight that not allowing people who are not on the lease that they can't move someone in without adding them to the lease. And that's a common problem. And I think it might be related to what you're seeing with the guests, because people think, well, it's my apartment. Why can't I have people over? Why can't I have someone sleep on my couch? And we have to explain that that's actually a lease obligation. We need to move a little quickly, more quickly as time goes flying by with our favorite group in Contra Costa.
Okay. So you also want to go to the rights of privacy. People often worry about people entering their apartment. You can't enter their apartment without either permission or there's a property management issue. And we want to explain that to people. They do have a right to a safe and well-maintained housing and repairs and safety considerations. And we want to teach people how to put in a work order, those sorts of things. But we also want to say that the landlord, what's the process for repairs and how long does it take? And, you know, some repairs like a dripping sink might take longer, but if the door is broken out in the front, the landlord has to fix that in most areas within 24 hours because it's a safety concern. We also want to talk to people, and this is very important, about due process. The landlord can't just tell them they need to go, right? They have to use the due process, and we want to teach people how that works, what the court, you get a letter, you get a 30-day notice, you get these things. And as we teach people that process, because a lot of homeless people, the landlord tells them to go, they'll go. And we don't want people walking away from apartments. Okay.
And
so let's go to, yep, go ahead.
I think there's a couple things popping up in the chat.
We
I
post-
saw, I just noticed when I mentioned before that people will leave their units, a number of you shook your heads, right? And so
Yeah.
really important that people hear that process.
What about
but
door
then-
locks? If the door locks have been broken down by a guest, it may be possible that they'll be charged for that, but it is the landlord's responsibility to ensure that every guest, every tenant has a functioning lock. What's BRB?
Be right back.
Oh.
Teresa, we post NTEs not to enter unless fire, flood, or blood, then we are going in.
Notice to enter.
Notice
Yes,
to enter.
okay,
No-
notice to enter, thank you.
Fire, flood, or
Fire,
blood?
flood, or
That's a
blood,
good one.
yes. Yeah, well, or the smell of, decaying flesh, but you don't want to say that.
No.
Unfortunately, it
that's
happens
another
too
reason.
often with our people, yeah. Okay, you ready to,
Yep,
ready
yeah,
to
let's
go
go.
on? Yep, time is flying.
Yep. So tenant laws differ by state. We've got a simple residential tenants and landlords' rights and responsibility. It's a California tenants law. I'm sure you've got other stuff that you use that you can just click on. We've also got a resource to teach tenancy skills, which is what JC referred to as teaching tenancy skills all along. It can be done as a course. It can be done individually. It's got a workbook format. There are many other tenancy courses. I would encourage you to check them out. This is a workbook format that we like and also is free. You can just download it and it's oftentimes helpful. And there's also a record of the conversations and you can do it as a course where you give people a certificate at the end, and people really like these tenancy courses. We suggest it happens before people go into housing and after people go into housing, because it takes a while to understand that. We're going to launch a quick poll on tenancy education. And here it is. Are you currently offering tenancy classes or services in your programs? Yes, no, or not sure. And do you think it would be useful to do more formal work or programming around tenancy education? And this is also single, yes, no, or not sure. So we'll give people a couple of seconds.
We're keeping your polls and button pushing skills active today, warming you up.
Yep.
Okay, we're getting,
Okay, we got 72%,
yep, we have
77.
folks. Okay, I think we're good. We have 17 out of 22. Yeah. Oh, 18. Okay, great.
Okay. So some people said they are offering tenancy education. Some people said no, both 6. And some people said not sure, but there was a resounding yes in terms of, do you think it would be useful to offer more tenancy work programming? And one person said not sure. So it sounds like that's something you want to integrate. And it sounds like it would be helpful for the things that you brought up. Okay.
Yep, I think the other thing about the tenancy education is it's a group session or a workshop or whatever you want to call it that people will show up for.
Yep.
Because it doesn't make people feel like it's not a disability-based service or like there's something wrong with you. This is so everybody really has the information to be a good tenant. And so it can be popular.
The other thing is it's a course with a beginning and end, and it gives people a sense of mastery and moving on. And offering people certificates for it can be very helpful. And people really
sometimes
like that.
legal services might be a good invite in, because that can be a good connection for people, and they will sometimes do, basic tenancy rights and responsibilities.
Yep.
Okay, so taking this right to the next place, because our work with landlords is really about preventing eviction and helping people maintain housing stability. And so we need to really think about preventing eviction, right? Especially as we're at the end of phase 3 with people. We know what's come up in the first 6 to 9 months. We want to make sure that we are working with them to have a plan to maintain their housing, not having an eviction. And how do we do that? We make sure people know all their rights and responsibilities. We rang that bell a few times. As Andrea just said, and we're repeating this as well, we really need to know early before things become too far gone to act on. I don't know if any of you, I think some of your agencies might run SSVF, which is Rapid Housing for Veterans. A lot of times landlords will feel, we hear this from the vets, VAs we work with, that it's a veteran and he didn't pay his rent and it's only $30 or $50 and I let it slide and I let it slide. Now it's $2,000 and I'm not letting it slide anymore, which might as well be Mount Everest for that veteran to pay off a $2,000 debt, right? And by then we are looking at probably losing the housing. So that early intervention and identification of problems is really important on our front, but also as we're working with people to teach them, when you get a letter from your landlord, don't stick it in the drawer unopened, which is what they might be inclined to do. Open the letter, respond to the landlord. Don't hide from the landlord. Hiding from the landlord does not usually result in a good outcome. We also want to help people understand that they could make an agreement with the landlord. Like if you were behind on your rent, you can do a payment plan. So we want to present those options to people if they're getting in trouble with their housing. Sometimes people might need some money for back rent, like $2,000 is Mount Everest. So I could, if there's a resource where we could cover 500 of that. Sometimes if a couple of you mentioned clutter, which I'm so surprised by.
That's a joke, y'all.
Yeah, I got a couple smiles. Clutter, collecting garbage, collecting things. And people may need help with a cleanup. They may need help with a deep cleanup. I know that usually people, it happens over time, but we do know, I think this was a situation in Hawaii where the guy moved in and he lived outside and he moved in and his house was so full of stuff within one day because he had been hiding it in the jungle, including 12 chickens that he moved into his house.
And a dog.
Day 2, and a dog. So they were like, where'd all this stuff come from? His house was completely full of stuff that he had out there. So he needed some help with really organizing. But anyway, that's just an example where sometimes the cleanup is so big, but we have to be very careful with people because if they are collecting things, that's an obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a lot of anxiety with parting with stuff. And that's a whole nother training we do on dealing with hoarding, but we need to be gentle. And it's a trauma-informed practice. We don't like take the person out for lunch and get the deep cleaning crew in to empty their apartment because then you'll be at the psychiatric hospital, frankly, right? It's a really sensitive issue and those things are really important to people, but they need to understand what the rules are. And Andrea referenced that. You got to have a pass from the door into the apartment, right? Like be very concrete, at least 3 feet wide. You can't collect stuff above this level. You can't leave food out not refrigerated that's perishable, right? Because that becomes a health and safety hazard, right? So making sure people are aware of that. We also want people to know what the steps are that you would get a notice if you were, especially in California, you have very strong tenant protections like we do, that you would not be evicted by a landlord telling you to get out. That is not the process, right? That's not the process in California. That you have a right to be heard in court, we will help you get legal representation, that a 30-day notice is a 30-day notice to cure, explaining that to people. So we want to make sure we know those things. We also want to make sure we have some legal resources for folks to connect them with, like your local legal aid. More and more, and I'm hoping it becomes a trend nationally, cities are implementing programs where anyone who's going to housing court will have representation, because we know from eviction rates that people have a lawyer are much less likely to get evicted than people who do not have a lawyer. And state of Connecticut just started that program. New York City has a program guaranteeing legal representation. That's an advocacy issue because I think everybody should have a lawyer in housing court. But that may take a little while. And then of course, crisis planning, right? So we know if we go back to Keisha that car keeps breaking down, right? So we got to plan for the next crisis when the car breaks down, right? And that might be the crisis that we need to work on. We also might know someone might have a psychiatric crisis and they might need a respite. So whatever that may be, what the crises are in people's lives, we want to help them plan for them. And I see the chat popping.
JC just mentioned that sometimes people have to be taught how to get a money order or use a tenant portal because they may not be familiar with that. And a lot of these are new skills, much like what you're talking about with storing stuff. And we need to do some hands-on teaching. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, people really need that you can't assume they can write a check or go online and do banking online. Some folks have, obviously, I think, depending on their age and their situation, are going to need more support. And also with forms and applications, because they're complicated and they're hard to fill out, right? So people need a lot of training on all those things. So when okay, I see a question from Randolph or Rob, who's probably got a third name he hasn't shared with us yet. At what point do you support a landlord evicting their tenant because as a case manager, you do not want to screw over a landlord? Remember, we're being recorded, who has been reasonable and done their best. That's a really good question. And I think that when we're working with landlords and we're working hard and they are doing their best to try and say, maybe work on this payment plan, and the person continues to not pay, and the person, there becomes a point where the landlord says, and ultimately it's their decision that they're going to go to eviction. And while, we would really rather that not happen, sometimes it might have to happen. And so, you will decide, will you keep fighting? Will you keep arguing? There may be a point where you go, I see where, there is really nothing now that can happen because you've given the person so many chances, you've tried the rent payment plan, they've been non-responsive. It's definitely a judgment call. I think we're always trying to have a win. But we know, and I guess just thinking about our own experiences in the field, is that it's really for a few people, it is going to go to eviction. It's going to happen sometimes. And we're not, telling the landlord or cheering them on, but we may say, okay, well, I'm going to help this person deal with the fact that you're serving them with eviction papers, because that would be the next step, right? Like if landlord has made their decision, they're going to evict the person, they start the process, then we need to let the landlord know that we're going to help the person hopefully either avoid eviction or find another place to live. And that may be, this may be the solution you're really looking for here, which is to say to the tenant, look, this landlord is going to evict you. He or she is finished. They're at their wit's end. They have grounds. You haven't paid your rent. You've had, whatever. So let's think about how we can get you into a new place. So we avoid having another eviction on your record, right? Because people don't need another legal eviction on their record. And if you've been working with a landlord that you want to, keep your relationship good with, if you can help have that person find another place and the landlord doesn't have to go through the eviction process, you just save them a few $1,000s because eviction is not free, right? So think about that when you're at that place where the landlord's going to eviction. Could we say, what if we help this person find a new unit and help them move on? And then you don't have to go through that process. So that may be, and that's been successful in certainly we've seen a lot of success with that with some of the chronically homeless folks who can't take one more thing on their background because they will never go anywhere again. So hope that helps on that, moving that forward.
I think sometimes you can preserve the subsidy that way too, which is helpful.
Absolutely. Yes, very important point. All right. And that actually is a perfect example of a harm reduction approach. That is one of our examples, is in preventing eviction. If we can have that person move to a new place, we have used harm reduction there. That is a really perfect example. You all know what harm reduction is for substances. Here, the harm reduction, that's really about preventing people from dying from disease, either through transmission from needles, overdose. But in this, the way we're taking it now is to kind of think about harm reduction with the goal of eviction prevention. So here's a list, probably too many things for one slide, of some harm reduction strategies that have helped people maintain their housing. Number one, and I know nobody wants to do this, but we learned in our practice, a lot of people have a lot of trouble with their money. And a rep payee, an automated rent payment, a fiduciary was going to be a much better likelihood that they would pay their rent. A lot of people will not agree to that, or don't have bank accounts where they can do automated rent payments, but helping people get that rent paid and planning their money. I'm going to use the B word when you're talking about financial planning, otherwise known as that we talk with people about how do you pay your rent and pay for the other things that you want in your life, because that's what's going to happen. Something is going to compete with rent, right? And we want to help people think about how to fund the things they need, even if we don't think that they really need them, which sometimes we might not. If people do feel like they need them, and I just remember a conversation with a woman about getting her hair and nail done, and the worker thought she shouldn't be spending money on her hair and nails because she needs to pay her rent. But for that particular person, her self-esteem was very much tied in with her hair and her nails. And so the goal was, how can we figure out that you have enough money to pay your rent and meet your personal needs, right? So that's where we move that conversation. And that goes to connecting to free resources. How can we stretch people's money budget? Can we save them some money if they go to the food bank and they pick up a bag of groceries every week, because that saves them $100 that they would have spent at the grocery store? What about, using the library for things instead of buying books? What about the clothing bank? That kind of stuff. We want to make sure people we're helping people increase their income, because that budget is very tight. It's always tight. So how can we get you more benefits, more income? Do you want to work? And as I mentioned, we need to budget for needs, and we also need to budget for recreation, because people are going to recreate, right? We all know what recreation is. I see a couple of smiles, right? We can go back and think about Josh is going to recreate in the evening, right? He's got to buy a couple cigarettes. He's got to buy. We want to be judgment free, so people tell us about this, so we can put it in their, in the budget. Gambling, another one of those things people don't tell us about, but they gamble, right? That's where'd your money go? Okay, so shopping discounts, thinking about how you can socialize without bothering your neighbors, carpets, drapes, air purifiers. I know with no smoking that may not work. People are going to need to smoke outside. We may need to work with them to smoke outside. We may need to help people most health departments will give free nicotine replacement therapy to people. Check those things out. That's what they do in the hospital now, because you can't smoke in the hospitals. They give everybody nicotine. They give free Nicorettes, right? Because otherwise they have a nightmare on their hands. So thinking about that kind of stuff, keeping the kids busy so they don't run around and destroy the property, having a connection to a faith community, which gives support, gives resources for emergencies, really helps people feel connected to their housing, to their life. Using substances different. We know whenever you drink vodka, Andrea, you get like a bear, a bull in a china closet. She doesn't drink vodka, but you get the example. But if you drink some wine, you're pretty mellow, right? So also looking at different ways for people to address substance use if that's causing the problem. Adding people to the lease. If they keep moving friends in, well, maybe they should add that person to the lease, having something to do. Find another unit. This is what I just talked about, the no harm, no foul thing, right? Let's find another place. And I'm seeing some typing in the chat box of other strategies you
They're
use.
they're supporting the recreation. We definitely want to consider the weed, the alcohol, and the recreation items of importance, including a check day girlfriend. We want to help people with that. Yeah.
Yep. People are going to recreate. So let's plan for it. Okay. So I want to move on because I want to give you guys a chance. I know you like talking to each other and we only have 15 minutes left. So this is it's something that we put in the, we added this attachment to the appointment. So you have a PDF of this document. This is a completed harm reduction plan to prevent eviction. So what we have, this is a blank form and you can look at it. I'm not going to pull it up because we don't have time. Eviction, what's the housing risk? The landlord smells marijuana coming from the apartment. It's bothering the neighbors and it's nuisance behavior. No matter what the rules are, that's still, so even if weed is legal in your state, which it is in your state, is in our state. If it's a nuisance, it still can be reason for eviction, right? Same thing with cigarette smoking. It's legal, but it may be, disturbing other people, even in a building where you're allowed to smoke. Anyway, so what are your options? And this is a tool we would use with the person. We would start with a blank chart and think, what can you do to solve this problem? So we get a few different options here. Stop smoking pot, find another way to consume marijuana, maybe use edibles, find another substitute, right? Not use pot. And then we talk with the person and ask them and elicit from them, what are the factors in favor of this option and the factors against? So we're teaching people a way to analyze a situation and make a decision about how to change their behavior in a way that considers the options. This will benefit them in a million other situations in their lives. So if they stop smoking pot, it solves the problem with the landlord, they'd save money, can get a better job. I got PTSD though, and I can't quit smoking pot, right? Because I got PTSD. At the end of the day, what's negotiable, what's non-negotiable. So, and we do this with each one of these different options, and you could make up your own, which is what you're going to do when I break you up into a group in a minute. But ultimately, we're trying to have the person find a way to get their needs met without putting their housing at risk. So there is, can you just pop, did you pop it already in there, the harm reduction plan into the
Nope,
chat
I'm
box?
doing that right now, sorry.
Okay. So we will pop it into the harm reduction blank and the example, but we want to give you a breakout group for the rest of your time. We're going to put you into groups of 3. One person being the participant or the tenant, one is the staff, and one is the observer. And try to talk about, create at least like one line, because you only have about 10 minutes, of a harm reduction plan, or one set of 3 different options. Create a harm reduction plan with a current participant. Think about someone you're working with. And the observer would give feedback or suggestions. So I think you did get it in there?
It's in.
Okay,
Yep.
great. So we're going to break you up into groups. We'll try for 3. If you only have 2 in your room, then you don't have an observer. So you'll have to observe yourselves, be self-reflection. Okay, I got to create a lot of rooms. Hold on. 10. Okay. All right. Button pressing time. Join a group. And come back if you have any questions. And we'll give you just till 2 or 3 minutes before the hour. Oh, I got to open the room so you can push the button. Sorry. My button pushing wasn't on. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I think the breakout rooms, yes, have all closed. So, and we only have a couple of minutes left. Maybe just give us a thumbs up if you think that tool might be helpful in working with some of your people. Got a couple thumbs ups.
Good.
Yeah. Yep. I know we really only gave you a taste of honey there, but I think it really does. They're getting some thumbs up, more thumbs up. Great. It really does help break it down and teach people the skills to solve problems besides just going, oh, screw it, I'm out of this housing. And remember, Suzanne, you're being recorded. Okay. All right. So we want to honor your time. We know you're busy and we have 1 minute left with you. So next steps in the training. Next week, we're going to talk about implementing the practice, supporting the practice, supervising the practice in your programs, and how to really integrate it into your practice. I have some discussions, and we had a couple polls for today, but we're going to save those for the beginning of next time. Client Lashandria is very realistic and gave her case manager a run for the money. That was from Alicia. All right. Well, thank you for being so good at role play. I know some people hate it, but some people like it. Any final comments? Shout out. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Thank you for, Alicia had a lot of answers for me.
Thank you for your time, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turn on your
Thank you,
cameras, give us a
Teresa.
wave.
Enjoyed talking with you.
We enjoyed.
Goodbye. Suzanne. Thank you,
Yeah,
Andrea.
thank you,
Have a
guys.
good weekend.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
week.
Have a
good
great week.
Bye, everybody. Have a good
Take
week.
good care. We'll
Have a
see you
good
next
week.
week.
Suzanne, can I talk to you for a minute?
Sure, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
So long. Thanks, you Unique, for the claps.
There we go.
Very sweet. Okay, great.
My link didn't work for some reason this morning.
For the meeting?
And my Zoom link, and I talked to my boss, Alicia, and she sent it to me, and it
Excuse me,
still would.
excuse me a second, Sarah. We want to stop recording probably.
Oh, okay.